At the edge of the Arizona desert, in the summer of 1943, the U.S. Army built a secret camp that few Americans even knew existed, Camp Arizonica. On the surface, it was just another military installation. But inside its barbed wire fences, thousands of German prisoners of war, captured in North Africa and Europe, were living lives that seemed impossible for men in captivity. Among them was Lieutenant Karl Meyer, a 25-year-old tank officer who had fought in Tunisia. Karl was trained to spot deception. He had been through North Africa, captured by the British, and shipped to the U.S. expecting harsh conditions, forced labor, and strict discipline. What he found instead was unsettling. The camp had 3 daily meals, a library stocked with books, educational classes, even a theater. Prisoners played volleyball on a proper court, organized musical ensembles, and wrote newspapers for themselves. Every detail screamed abundance. Too much abundance. Karl and the others were suspicious. This has to be propaganda, he thought. Why would Americans treat us like this? They must be trying to weaken our morale. He wasn't alone. Other prisoners had formed a secret committee to analyze every detail of life at Camp Arizonica. By night, Karl and the senior officers would meet in the shadows of the barracks. They discussed the camp's books, newspapers, and even the photographs hanging in the library. Their most heated debate? The Grand Canyon photographs. The canyon looked impossibly massive, deep, and vivid. They were convinced. It had to be fake. How could any country carve such a landscape, let alone allow prisoners to see it? The committee was determined to uncover the truth. Was this comfortable life a trick? Was the food drugged? Were the rivers on the maps real? Or were they all part of a massive American lie, designed to make them weak, hungry for home, and ready to fail at escape? And that's when the seed of the greatest escape in Arizona desert history was planted. Though Karl had no idea, it would test him far beyond what he thought possible. By August 1944, Karl and his secret committee had come to a chilling conclusion. If the Americans were lying about their abundance, then nothing in the camp could be trusted. And if nothing could be trusted, escape was the only way to reclaim some control over their fate. The plan was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. Dig a tunnel beneath the barracks, stretching almost 180 feet under the desert soil, and emerge outside the barbed wire fence. From there, the prisoners would split into small groups and head south, toward Mexico, 120 miles away. 25 men volunteered immediately. Each night, under the cover of darkness, they would remove a shower drain, dig for 3 hours, and carefully dispose of the clay-colored dirt. The solution? Spread it on the volleyball court during the day, mixing it with sand so the guards would never notice the difference. The tunnel itself was a nightmare of labor. Narrow, just 2 feet wide, forcing men to crawl, it required careful reinforcement with wooden planks salvaged from camp supplies. Ventilation was improvised from rolled-up paper, and the work had to be done without making a single sound. The prisoners were meticulous. Every detail was planned. Canteens of water, rationed carefully. Food packs from the canteen, enough for days, but light enough to carry. Handmade compasses, crafted from magnetized razor blades. Hand-drawn maps, created from memory and library books. A small team even smuggled parts for a collapsible boat, hoping to navigate Arizona rivers on the way to Mexico. By December, after 4 months of secret digging, the tunnel was ready. The night of the escape was chosen carefully. A new moon, clear skies, and temperatures around 55 degrees. It was the moment Karl had been waiting for, though he couldn't know yet how merciless the desert would be, or how deadly the maps could lie. When the prisoners crawled out into the cold desert night, adrenaline mixed with fear. For the first time in months, they were free. But freedom in the Arizona desert was a different kind of danger than the walls of the camp. Karl Meyer and his partner, Otto Weber, emerged from the tunnel into the cold desert night, their hearts pounding. The camp lights disappeared behind them. For the first time in months, they were free. But the Arizona desert was waiting. At first, the desert seemed calm, almost peaceful. The stars stretched endlessly above them, guiding their path south toward Mexico. But as the hours passed, the reality of their escape began to hit. The first challenge: water. The desert was dry, unforgiving, and every creek they had plotted on their maps was empty. Dry red sand and cracked riverbeds mocked their carefully drawn plans. Karl realized that the Arizona rivers, unlike those in Europe or North Africa, did not flow year-round. The maps in the camp library had shown them as blue, navigable waterways. But in winter, they were dust and rock. By sunrise, Karl and Otto had been walking for hours. Their canteens were nearly empty. The desert sun began to rise, warming the sand to a relentless heat, and the mild 55-degree night had become a deceptive illusion of comfort. By mid-morning, Karl's lips were cracked and bleeding. Otto's breathing had become heavy. He was coughing from the dry air. Every step forward was agony. The navigation tools they carried, a compass made from a magnetized razor blade, hand-drawn maps, were accurate, but survival required more than direction. They pressed on, hoping for the next creek, hoping for water. Each dry creek was a blow to morale. By noon, both men had finished their remaining canteen water. The desert, which at first seemed like a simple barrier, was now a formidable enemy. And yet, the fear of returning to the camp too soon kept them moving. The idea of being captured again felt like failure, but nature had its own plan. By the afternoon, Karl and Otto faced a grim decision: continue south into the desert hoping to find water, or return to the highway and try to flag down a vehicle. After hours of arguing, they compromised. They would walk south for 2 more hours, and if they found nothing, they would return. The desert had them in its grip, testing every ounce of their resolve. The lesson was already clear. Escaping a camp was only the first challenge. Surviving the Arizona desert required more cunning, luck, and endurance than any German officer had imagined. After 21 grueling hours of crawling, walking, and nearly dying of thirst, Karl Meyer and Otto Weber finally spotted a dusty pickup truck rolling along the highway. The driver, a Mexican farm worker named Miguel Hernandez, stopped when he saw the 2 men waving desperately. Karl tried to explain in broken Spanish and English that they were escaped German prisoners from Camp Arizonica. Miguel didn't fully understand, but he did understand one thing: they needed water. Karl drank until he felt sick. Otto sipped cautiously. The farm worker, noticing their exhaustion, offered a ride back to the camp. For Karl, the idea of returning, after everything, felt like admitting defeat. But Otto, weak and dehydrated, agreed. They climbed into the truck, the desert fading behind them. When they arrived at Camp Arizonica, Karl's eyes caught something he never expected: a poster outside the mess hall with the Christmas menu. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes topped with caramelized marshmallows, green beans, cranberry sauce, dinner rolls with butter, apple pie, pumpkin pie, pecan pie, coffee with real cream and sugar. Karl stared, thinking, "This can't be real." It's a trick, propaganda. But hunger, exhaustion, and months of deprivation had eroded his skepticism. The men were ushered inside, and when the food was served, it was exactly as promised. Moist turkey, hot gravy, sweet pies with flaky crusts. Everything tasted real. Karl and Otto ate slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing the reality of each bite. Every morsel was proof of abundance, proof that the Americans could provide for their enemies while fighting a global war. For the first time in months, Karl felt something he hadn't felt since the desert escape began. Relief. The desert, the tunnel, the struggle. It all ended not with bullets, but with pie. He realized that surrendering wasn't defeat. In a strange, almost surreal way, it was survival. And that Christmas menu, once dismissed as propaganda, had proven more powerful than any plan to escape the camp. The tunnel had been a masterpiece. The escape had been daring. And yet, Karl Mayer and the others had failed not because of guards, guns, or pursuit, but because of the desert itself. The Arizona desert was far more unforgiving than North Africa. Rivers they had counted on were dry. Distances were vast, scorching days followed by freezing nights. Their carefully drawn maps had betrayed them, showing navigable waterways and manageable distances that didn't exist. Karl sat by the mess hall window, watching the snowflake paper decorations sway in the December breeze. He thought about the Salt River, where 3 of the escapees had attempted to use a makeshift boat. The riverbed had been completely dry. Sand and rocks where their blue lines on the map promised flowing water. He realized something profound. The men had misunderstood Arizona, not out of ignorance, but because their knowledge had been shaped entirely by assumptions. They had assumed the desert would behave like familiar landscapes. They had assumed rivers would flow. They had assumed the Americans were lying about the abundance, but in reality, the desert, not the enemy, had been their greatest adversary. Even the camp commander, Colonel William Holden, recognized the irony. The escape had exploited no human weakness, only the prisoners' misunderstanding of nature. Guards had been competent, but the prisoners' failure was fundamentally geographical and psychological. Karl understood now. Survival required not just courage or planning, it required accepting the reality around you, no matter how alien it seemed. The desert had been more cunning than any man, and the Christmas turkey had been a reminder that some truths were stranger and kinder than any deception. A few weeks after the escape, Colonel Holden arranged something the prisoners could never have imagined: a trip to see the Grand Canyon. For men who had spent months questioning everything, every meal, every map, every river, this would be the ultimate test of reality. Karl Mayer, Otto Weber, and 23 others rode in army buses north, the desert stretching endlessly behind them. When they stopped at the south rim, Karl stepped off the bus and froze. Before him lay the Grand Canyon, vast and impossibly deep. Red, orange, and purple layers of rock stretched for miles. The Colorado River, thin and winding, glimmered far below, over a mile down. For the prisoners, the images they had once dismissed as propaganda were utterly real. Karl's hands shook as he traced the lines of the canyon with his eyes. Otto, standing beside him, couldn't speak. Tears ran silently down his face. Karl felt a strange mixture of awe and realization. Here was a nation so wealthy and powerful that it could preserve a natural wonder, allow enemy prisoners to see it, and continue fighting a war on multiple continents. This was not deception. This was abundance. For Karl, the canyon became a symbol. Germany had not just lost battles, It had lost the war to a country capable of generosity and creation on a scale he had never imagined. The tunnel, the escape, the desert, those trials had led him here. And now he understood something deeper. Sometimes, the enemy's greatness is revealed not on the battlefield, but in what they can build and share. As the prisoners gazed over the rim, silence fell. No words could capture the enormity of what they were seeing. The Grand Canyon was real, undeniable, and it shattered every assumption they had clung to about the United States. After the Grand Canyon visit, Karl Mayr returned to Camp Arizonica. But life inside the barbed wire had changed. The desert, the tunnel, and the escape had taught him more than any battlefield ever could: survival, patience, and the strange mercy of abundance. When the war finally ended in May 1945, Karl was processed for repatriation to Germany. He arrived in Hamburg in early 1946, to a city reduced to rubble, its streets scarred by bombs, its people struggling to survive. The contrast was staggering. In Arizona, the prisoners had eaten turkey, pies, and vegetables in abundance. In Hamburg, food was rationed, heat was scarce, and housing was destroyed. Karl often thought about Camp Arizonica, the Christmas menu, the dry desert rivers, and the Grand Canyon. Those memories shaped his understanding of the world. A nation capable of generosity, even to its enemies, held a power beyond guns and tactics. In 1953, Karl made a decision that surprised many. He immigrated to the United States, choosing to make the desert his home. He settled in Phoenix, not far from the old campsite, which by then had been deactivated and mostly demolished. The volleyball courts were gone, the barracks erased. But the desert remained. The same unforgiving landscape he had crawled across, the same beauty he had seen from the tunnel exit. Karl became an engineer, married an American woman, and raised a family. He lived out his days in Arizona, never returning to Germany permanently. When asked about the war, he would tell stories not of battles or tanks, but of Camp Arizonica, the tunnel, the escape, and the Christmas turkey and pie that had saved him in the desert. For Karl, these experiences had taught something lasting. Truth can be stranger than fiction, and generosity can be more powerful than deception. The desert had tested him, the canyon had humbled him, and the abundance had changed him forever. Karl Mayr lived the rest of his life in Arizona, but the lessons of Camp Arizonica never left him. The desert escape, the failed tunnel, the dry riverbeds, and the Christmas turkey. They weren't just stories of war. They were proofs of resilience, perception, and the strange kindness that can exist even in times of conflict. Standing later in life on the edge of the Grand Canyon, Karl would reflect on that moment in 1945, when he had first seen its impossible scale. He realized that Germany hadn't just lost battles. It had lost to a nation capable of creating wonders and generosity at the same time. And that realization had freed him in a way the desert never could. Karl's story is more than history. It's a reminder that truth is often stranger than fiction, that survival sometimes depends on accepting reality rather than assumptions, and that generosity can defeat suspicion. The tunnel, the escape, the desert, the food, they all led to a revelation bigger than any war. That human compassion and abundance are forces more powerful than fear or propaganda. Karl Mayr passed away quietly in Phoenix, leaving behind a family and a life built in the desert he had once struggled to survive. But his story lived on, not in official records, not in newspapers, but in the memories of those who heard it. A story of a young German soldier who escaped, surrendered, and discovered the truth about a country, a canyon, and himself. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The story of Camp Arizonica isn't just history. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unbelievable things are real.